Spoiler alert, before you watch this video, if you haven't already, I would recommend watching the first 3 chapters in the story using the link in the description below.
Harry Potter and the Elder Wizard, Chapter 4, The New Care of Magical Creatures Teacher. The castle buzzed with intrigue, whispers, and rumors the next morning. The news of Dumbledore's astonishing transformation had somehow spread like wildfire, and every eye was fixed on the staff table, awaiting his arrival. "I heard he looks like a teenager again," said Seamus, making everyone laugh. "Maybe he'll ask you out for Valentine's Day, Hermione," smirked Ron. "At least he's not ginger," spat Hermione in a savage clapback, stunning Ron. As if on cue, the door swung open with a grandeur that silenced the hall. Dumbledore, with his newfound youth and vigor, strode confidently to the podium. His appearance was startling. Gone were the wrinkles and signs of age. These were replaced by the smooth skin and robust health of his younger years. Murmurs erupted, but a raised hand from their headmaster brought instant quiet. "Good morning, my young wizards and witches," he began, his voice strong and now less old-sounding than they were accustomed. "Some of you may have noticed a small change in my appearance. Last night, an old friend provided me with the gift of rejuvenation. I stand before you now, renewed, reinvigorated, and ready to defend our beloved school and the wider wizarding world against the darkness that encroaches." The hall erupted into whispers once more, the students exchanging looks of awe and disbelief. Change, however, is not limited to my person. Hogwarts itself must adapt for the times we face. In the coming days, you will notice several changes around the school. These are necessary to ensure our safety and to prepare us for the challenges ahead. With a final reassuring smile, Dumbledore returned to his seat, leaving the hall reignited with excitement and speculation. Later that morning, Harry, Ron, and Hermione made their way down to the grounds for their Care of Magical Creatures lesson, discussing the potential changes Dumbledore was talking about. As they approached the usual spot, they stopped short, unexpectedly seeing Professor Gandalf, tall and commanding, standing beside another figure they didn't recognize. An equally ancient-looking wizard with a slightly eccentric appearance, cloaked in earthy tones, and surrounded by a few curious creatures. "Gather round, everyone, and meet your new Care of Magical Creatures teacher," Gandalf greeted them warmly. "Dumbledore has asked me to introduce your new Care of Magical Creatures teacher. This is Professor Radagast, the Brown, a fellow wizard from my world, skilled in the ways of wild beasts and changes of hue." "What happened to Professor Hagrid?" asked Harry, interrupting Gandalf. "Silence," barked Gandalf, leering at Harry for a moment before gesturing for their new teacher to take over. Radagast, with a kind and somewhat absent-minded smile, nodded at them. "Pleased to meet you, children. I look forward to sharing the wonders of magical creatures with you." The students exchanged bewildered looks. Another wizard from Gandalf's world? What other wonders and oddities were in store for them? And why was Hagrid being replaced? As the class proceeded, Radagast proved to be a knowledgeable and engaging teacher, introducing the students to creatures they had never before seen or heard of. His methods were unconventional but effective. He sat them down at the edge of the forest and told them of the wargs and goblins, of fell beasts and great eagles, and of Smog, the chiefest and greatest of calamities. After class, the trio spotted Hagrid approaching them, looking somewhat forlorn. "It's all temporary, just till the war's over," he explained in his gruff voice. "Dumbledore reckons with Voldemort gathering forces. We need all the help we can get. I'm back to being the groundskeeper for now, keeping an eye on the borders." Harry, sensing Hagrid's mixed feelings, clapped a hand on his massive shoulder. "We'll still need you, Hagrid." Hagrid offered a small smile, patting Harry's back with a hand so large and heavy, Harry coughed up some blood. His eyes widened in horror as he looked at the crimson in his hand. He hoped the internal bleeding wasn't too bad as Hagrid, who seemed oblivious to what he had done, went on. "Thanks, Harry. Just you wait. Hogwarts will be stronger than ever with all this help and Dumbledore being strong again, just you wait. As they walked back to the castle, the trio discussed the changes. Hogwarts was evolving, preparing for a battle that loomed ever closer. With Gandalf and Radagast's arrival, they felt a mix of hope and uncertainty. The war was coming, but so were allies from beyond their world, bringing with them new strengths and weapons perhaps. Above them, the castle stood tall and proud, a beacon of light against the coming darkness. With Dumbledore's renewed vigor and the wisdom of wizards from another world, Hogwarts was more than a school. It was a fortress, a symbol of resistance, and a home to those who would stand against the night. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but together they would face it. With a small pop, Dobby appeared beside Harry. "Hi, Dobby," the trio greeted. "Master Harry, Professor Dumbledore needs you and Professor Gandalf immediately," he squeaked, his hands raised defensively as if expecting another accidental strike. Harry, concerned by Dobby's fearful demeanor, nodded and followed the house elf, weaving through the corridors filled with the soft echoes of hundreds of years of magical learning. As they approached Dumbledore's office, the low, angry rumble of voices from within halted them. "An unbreakable vow," shouted the unmistakable voice of Snape, but Harry noted it carried both fear and fury. "I promise to protect Draco until he succeeds in the task the Dark Lord has given him. And if he fails, I must do it myself. I cannot break this vow, Albus." Dobby cowered, but Harry was full of curiosity, motioning for him to be quiet as they listened. Gandalf's voice then thundered from inside the office in response, his tone as commanding as a storm. "Be silent. Keep your forked tongue behind your teeth. I have not passed through fire and death to bandy crooked words with a witless worm." There was a stunned silence, then Dumbledore's calmer voice cut through the tension. "Severus, I understand the gravity of your situation. We must find a way to delay Draco's plans. We need time to devise a means to circumvent the consequences of breaking this unbreakable vow." Snape responded with a frustrating hiss. "Time? How much time do we have, Albus? Draco is determined, and the Dark Lord grows impatient. If I fail to fulfill my vow, it will kill me." Dumbledore's tone was grave yet calming. "I am aware of the risks, Severus, but we have no other choice at the present other than to accept the risk. If you wish to remove this risk and save your own life now, thereby guaranteeing our defeat of this war, then go ahead. Take my life. I will not stop you." There was a lengthy pause in the office before Dumbledore spoke again. Evidently, Snape had chosen not to save his own life. "Fate now begins to favor us. We now have new allies and wisdom on our side. Gandalf here has faced darkness that would wither the souls of most. We will find a solution, I promise you." Harry's mind raced. The situation was more dire than he had imagined. Snape, bound by an unbreakable vow to protect Draco and possibly kill Dumbledore? What on earth was going on? This was a tangled web of loyalties and complexities that seemed impossible for Harry's simple mind to unravel. He was about to knock on the door when it suddenly swung open, revealing Dumbledore, his eyes twinkling. Harry still hadn't gotten used to his new youthful appearance. His once ancient headmaster now looked like a slim man in his mid-30s. "Harry, please come in," he said. Harry stepped into the office and took his usual seat as indicated by Dumbledore. The room, usually filled with the sounds of various magical devices, was unusually quiet. "Thank you for coming so promptly," he said, then turned his gaze to Snape. "Severus, we will continue this discussion later." Snape's face was a storm of rage, but he nodded stiffly and turned to leave. As he passed Gandalf, the wizard's deep voice rumbled once more. "Remember, Severus, you are of the line of Grima Wormtongue. Choose your words and your path wisely." Snape paused, his back rigid, then without a word, swept out of the room. As the door closed, Dumbledore turned and focused on Harry. "Professor, what's an unbreakable vow?" asked Harry before he could stop himself. "I know you have many questions, and in time, I hope to answer them all. But for now, I must ask you to trust me when I say some matters are not your concern at this moment." Harry nodded, slightly embarrassed at his impulsiveness at letting them know he'd been listening at the door, but reading the finality in Dumbledore's tone, he decided not to press the matter. Dumbledore's face softened slightly. "Thank you, Harry. Now, on to more pressing matters. We have located a horcrux, one of the pieces of Voldemort's soul. Its acquiring is vital to weakening him and ultimately defeating him." Harry's heart raced. "What do you need me to do, sir?" "I would like you to accompany Professor Gandalf and I to retrieve it," responded Dumbledore. "Your connection to Voldemort might be crucial in locating it." "Yes, sir. When do we leave?" "Tonight," Dumbledore replied. "The Order, along with the teachers, will be on guard while we are away. You must be discreet and quick. Go back to your dormitory, collect your cloak, and return here immediately." "Okay, sir. I'll be back as quickly as I can." And without hesitation, Harry rose and hurried out of the office. Fortunately, on his way to Gryffindor Tower, he found Ron and Hermione and quickly pulled them aside. "Listen," he said in a hushed tone, "Dumbledore and Gandalf will be away from the castle tonight. They're going after a horcrux, and I'm going with them. Stay on guard and keep this quiet. I have a feeling there might be trouble tonight." "Wow," said Ron, his face a mixture of fear and admiration, while Hermione looked worried. "Be careful, Harry," she said tensely. "I will," he promised, before dashing off to his dormitory. Cloak in hand, Harry returned to Dumbledore's office, panting. "Are you ready, Harry?" Dumbledore asked. Harry nodded, his hand gripping the cloak tightly. "Yes, sir." "Very well," said Dumbledore, standing up. He approached a cabinet and withdrew a small, intricately carved box. "We will be traveling by portkey. It is a safer and more discreet way to travel under the current circumstances." As Harry prepared to step forward, Gandalf's gaze fell upon the cloak in his hand. "May I?" he asked, extending his hand. Harry handed the cloak over, and Gandalf examined it closely, his eyes narrowing with vague familiarity. "Ah, this is no ordinary garment," he remarked, as though recognizing an old possession. "An enchanted elven cloak of Lothlorien, if I'm not mistaken. A rare and valuable piece of craftsmanship." Harry looked surprised. "You know about my cloak?" asked a surprised Harry. "I do," Gandalf smiled, a glint of appreciation in his eyes. "It will serve you well on our journey." He handed the cloak back to Harry, but did not elaborate any further. Gandalf stepped forward, his eyes reflecting the flickering light of the room. "The road ahead will be perilous, Harry. Keep your wits about you." "I will, sir." Dumbledore offered an encouraging smile. "I have no doubt of that, Harry. Now, let's go." The three of them touched a portkey. There was a sudden jerk behind their navels, and the world whirled away. Their quest for the horcrux had begun. Harry Potter and the Elder Wizard, Chapter 5, The Cave. The world was a storm of fury and noise as Harry, Dumbledore, and Gandalf approached the cliffside where the cave lay hidden. The cave Harry had seen in the memory Dumbledore had shared with him. The sea churned below them, its waves crashing against the cliffs with a ferocity that sent sprays of cold salt water hurtling into the air. The sky, a dark canvas of ominous clouds, threatened with the occasional flash of distant lightning. The entrance to the cave was barely discernible against the dark, rocky backdrop. Dumbledore led the trio to the edge, his wand glowing softly in his hand. With intricate gestures and whispered incantation, the entrance widened, the sea momentarily calming at the mouth of the cave. "We'll have to swim across." Dumbledore's voice cut through the roar of the wind, barely audible over the tumult of the sea. Harry looked at the churning waters with a deep sense of dread. "Could you not conjure a boat, Professor?" "This is the problem with your generation, Harry. "You're afraid of hard work," replied Dumbledore with a clear look of disappointment in his eyes. Gandalf, beside him, muttered under his breath about the cold and the wet, his stoic demeanor giving way to obvious discomfort. With a deep breath, they plunged into the icy waters. The cold was an immediate assault, the waves tossing them around with the force of the storm. Harry struggled against the water, fighting for every stroke, following the dim lights of Dumbledore and Gandalf, who swam with powerful strokes toward the cave. The swim felt endless, but he pressed on, drawing on every reserve of strength he had in the wake of being shamed by his headmaster. When they finally reached the relative calm at the opening of the cave, they clambered onto a rocky outcrop, taking a moment to catch their breath. Their chests heaved and their hearts pounded from the exertion and fear. As they entered the cave, the air grew colder, the oppressive weight of the place pressing down upon them. They moved cautiously, aware of the magical protections that might lurk unseen around them. The path wound deeper into the earth, the walls of the cave closing in around them until they reached a large antechamber. In the center, a small lake lay still and silent, an island barely visible in the middle. Dumbledore paused, his eyes scanning the smooth rock wall that blocked their way forward. "This is not a natural formation," he murmured. "There's magic here, dark and old." He raised his hand, revealing a small silver dagger, and prepared to cut his palm, in apparent sacrifice necessary to open the way. But Gandalf intervened, his hand closing firmly over Dumbledore's. "Wait, Albus. There is more than one way to overcome such barriers." He stepped forward, his staff raised. The ancient wizard spoke a word of command, a word that seemed to echo from the very depths of the earth. The rock wall shivered, and then, with a sound like a sigh, it parted, revealing the dark waters of the lake beyond. Entering, they turned the corner and a massive cavern opened up before them, revealing a vast underground lake. In the center, an island loomed, a solitary silhouette against the dimly lit waters. On it, they could just make out the outline, a small thin altar of sorts. Dumbledore, his eyes sharp and searching, investigated the area, his wand illuminating the dark recesses along the shore. It was then that he discovered something hidden from ordinary sight, a small chain, partially submerged and almost indistinguishable from the rocks around it. Dumbledore tapped the chain with his wand. There was a small clinking sound, and then, to Harry's surprise, a small boat began to emerge from the shadows, pulled towards them by the enchanted chain. It bobbed gently on the surface of the lake, seemingly waiting for its passengers. "This will carry us to the island," Dumbledore murmured. "Are you sure you don't want to swim, Professor?" said Harry, asked innocently, but failing to entirely disguise the sarcasm in his voice. Dumbledore scowled but did not respond. They climbed into the small vessel, which held steady under their weight. Dumbledore released the chain, and it began to move of its own accord, gliding silently over the dark waters toward the island. Harry sat tense and alert, his eyes fixed on their destination, the sense of foreboding growing with every passing moment. He could feel the horcrux's malignant presence calling out to them from the darkness. The journey across the lake was eerie and silent, the only sound the gentle lapping of water against the side of the boat. When they finally reached the shore, the sense of dread was almost overwhelming upon Harry. Dumbledore led them to the center, where the basin sat on an ancient pedestal. It was filled with a potion that shimmered with an unnatural light, beneath which they saw the locket sitting. "There's no way of getting to the locket without first drinking the potion," Dumbledore declared, after a couple minutes investigating bowl. Harry watched, a horrible knot forming in his stomach, as the headmaster conjured a cup and began to drink the cursed liquid. Each gulp seemed to take a toll on him, his body shaking, his breaths becoming labored. Panicking, Harry looked to Gandalf for help to ease his headmaster's suffering. "Fear not. The ring will protect him from the worst of it," comforted Gandalf, in response to Harry's silent pleas for help. As Dumbledore continued to consume the potion, his features contorted in pain, a grimace etched deep into his face. Harry's heart raced with fear, his hands clenching into fists at his side, feeling every shudder and wince as if they were his own. Gandalf stood beside them, a stoic guardian, his eyes ever watchful for the danger they all sensed was coming. Then, as Dumbledore's sips became more labored and the basin finally emptied, a weak plea escaped his lips. "Water!" he gasped, his voice barely a whisper. Harry, frantic with worry, glanced around the cavern. The only source of water was the lake surrounding them, dark and still. Without a second thought, Harry rushed to the water's edge, his hands cupping together to bring some of the lake water to Dumbledore. But as his fingers touched the surface, the calm water stirred and shapes began to emerge from the depths. Gaunt, ghostly figures, their eyes void of life, rose up from the lake. The Inferi, guardians of the Horcrux, had been disturbed by his attempt to take the water. The Inferi came, rising from the dark waters like nightmares brought to life. Gandalf sprang into action, Glamdring shining brightly in that dark cave. He fought with a fury that was both terrifying and age-defying, cutting through the Inferi with each swing of his sword. Harry joined the fight, casting spells and pushing back the undead with every ounce of strength he had. When it was over and the Inferi were vanquished, they rushed to Dumbledore's side. He was weak, barely conscious, but his rejuvenated body held up better than it would have had he still been an old man. Gandalf pulled a small flask from his robe and put it to Dumbledore's mouth. "Drink," he commanded. "This is Miruvor, the cordial of Imladris." And as he drank, the color slowly returned to his pale face. Dumbledore, though still visibly weak, seemed to regain most of his strength. The effects of the elven cordial Gandalf had administered, combined with the protection offered by the Ring of Velia and his recently reinvigorated youth, worked to heal him remarkably well. Harry shuddered at the thought of what would have happened if they had not had all these things, and Dumbledore was still an old man. After a few minutes, his breathing steadied and color returned to his cheeks. His HP bar had been fully replenished. Once the immediate danger had passed and the last of the Inferi retreated into the Black Waters, Gandalf turned his attention to their situation. "Albus, we cannot linger here. Let's return to the school," he counseled. "Let's go," said Dumbledore, nodding. Suddenly, with a familiar sensation of being pulled through a tight tube, they apparated away from the island, leaving the dark cave and its horrors behind. They arrived amidst the familiar sights and sounds of Hogsmeade, but their attention was immediately drawn to the dark mark visible in the distance, casting an ominous glow over the tallest tower of Hogwarts. "What the fuck?" gasped Harry, his heart sinking. The symbol of fear and death hovered above his school, signaling that danger and possibly death had already arrived. Dumbledore now stood strong, his vitality visibly restored, looking toward his school with a cold fury. Thinking quickly, Harry ran and secured them broomsticks from Madame Rose Murda, who was aware of the urgency and did not dare question the trio. Mounting the broomsticks, they took to the air, the wind whipping around them as they soared towards the castle. The journey was a blur, the landscape below passing in a rush of shadows and light. Harry's mind raced with worry and fear for his friends. What had transpired under the dark mark? Were they too late? As they landed on the tower, the air crackled with tension, and the dark mark loomed ominously above, casting a pale green glow on surroundings. Without warning, a disarming spell struck Dumbledore. His wand flew from his hand, clattering to the ground, where Draco Malfoy quickly scooped it up. Dumbledore, with a swift motion, had managed to cast a freezing charm on Harry before being disarmed, keeping him hidden and immobile under the cloak, ensuring he wouldn't intervene. Had Dumbledore's newfound youth come at the cost of his fucking wits? Harry thought angrily. Why did the idiot decide to immobilize his own ally and not the enemy before him? His heart pounded as he could only watch as Draco fucking Malfoy approached Dumbledore, his wand shaking at his headmaster. Their situation was fraught with nervous tension as Draco fought a particularly challenging moral quandary. The Death Eaters approached, their dark forms emerging from the shadows, and began pressing Draco to act, with venomous whispers spurring him on. As Draco struggled, torn between his orders and his conscience, Snape appeared. his face a mask of unreadable intent as he approached Dumbledore. The moment was charged, a standoff that felt like the calm before a storm. Then, without warning, a deep bellow echoed through the tower. Gandalf, who had been momentarily out of sight and forgotten about, emerged with a fury unmatched. His staff raised high. He unleashed a powerful blast of magic that went off like a bomb. The Death Eaters, caught off guard, were flung like rag dolls, some careening off the tower into the abyss below. Draco, his resolve faltering at the sight of such raw power, was caught in the shockwave and thrown over the edge, his scream piercing the night. But at that moment, Snape, in a flash of dark magic, transformed into an enormous, ugly bat, swooping down after him. In the corner of his eye, Harry was able to see the large bat-like form catching the screaming Draco before he could hit the ground and carrying him away into the night. The remaining Death Eaters, those who had managed to cling to the tower, scrambled to escape, their plans in disarray. Gandalf now stood in their midst unveiled, a blinding white figure. He unleashed Glamdring and with a smooth sweep took off the head of Fenrir Greyback, instantly unaliving him and causing the other Death Eaters to scatter. Only one masked Death Eater remained, raising his wand to strike at the unarmed Dumbledore, but before the spell could leave his lips, Gandalf was upon him. With another swift, clean stroke, Glamdring cut through the air and severed the Death Eater's arm. It fell to the ground with a sickening thud, causing the masked Death Eater to scream loud enough to wake the entire castle. The battle was over almost as quickly as it had begun. Several Death Eaters lay dead at his feet, only a handful managing to escape his fury. The Death Eaters, those who had survived, retreated into the night, their numbers diminished. The tower, once a place of quiet study of the heavens, had become a battleground, the scene of a fierce clash between light and dark. In the aftermath, Dumbledore, Harry, and Gandalf regrouped, their breathing heavy from the confrontation. Harry, no longer frozen, felt an enormous wave of relief. None of the Order or his friends had been hurt in the attack, and they had faced Death Eaters, retrieved a horcrux, and survived. The war against Voldemort was far from over, but today was a great victory. Back in Dumbledore's office, the first light of dawn had broken through the windows, casting a soft glow on the trio. They sat reflecting on the night's events. "We have achieved a great victory today, Albus, but I fear the final confrontation will not be so easy." "No, Gandalf, our situation is far more dire than you realize," responded Dumbledore, looking uncharacteristically distraught. "I lost the Elder Wand to Draco. Should Voldemort claim it, I fear he will become unbeatable, with the spirit of Sauron aiding him even for our combined strength." Gandalf was silent for a moment. Then, with a sudden brightness, he spoke, "Not while I walk Middle-earth. I've come to you at this crucial turn of the tide, not to witness your defeat, but to aid you against the forces of evil. This Elder Wand, these deathly hallows, are more familiar to me than you might imagine." Dumbledore's eyes widened, recalling prior mention of them by Gandalf. "You know of the hallows?" "I do, for I was there at their inception. The tale of the Peverell brothers and the gifts I bestowed upon them has been twisted through the ages. But know this, the power they wielded, the power you fear now, is but a shadow of what truly was," revealed Gandalf. You were Death?" stammered Harry incredulously, his mind reeling. Gandalf nodded solemnly. "I have been many things, Harry, and to many I have indeed been Death. But the time of the Peverells was different. They showed courage and wisdom, and in return, I granted them rewards to aid their quest for a better world." He raised his staff, the ancient wood seeming to pulse with a deep inner light. "The Elder Wand was made from this very staff, which I hold." Gandalf held it aloft for them to see. "It possesses but a small portion of the staff's power. As for my strength, you have but seen glimpse of it." "You created the Deathly Hallows?" continued Dumbledore, scrutinizing both Gandalf and his staff, as if seeing them properly for the first time. "Yes, even your cloak, Harry. It is a cloak of Lothlorien, made by the Lady of the Woods, enchanted and imbued with the power of the One Ring." "And the Resurrection Stone?" asked Dumbledore. "Alas, I created the ring in my longing to speak to those I lost in the Fellowship. I have had long years to study ring lore and was eventually able to craft it. I spoke to my friends, who forgave me for failing them. When I met the second brother, I saw in his eyes the loss I once felt, so I gave him the Resurrection Stone. Unfortunately, he turned out to be an imbecile and promptly took his own life." "Then perhaps all is not lost," responded Dumbledore, a new spark of hope flickering in his eyes. "No, indeed it is not." Chapter 6: The Dream-Enhancing Potion. The dawn's early light crept through the windows of Hogwarts. The night's battle atop the astronomy tower had left its mark upon the inhabitants of the castle, reminding all of the inescapable war that loomed over them. In the aftermath, Dumbledore found himself in the quiet solitude of his office, the weight of their situation pressing heavily upon his shoulders. Yet, amidst the shadows of doubt, a flicker of hope had been rekindled. Sitting across from Professor McGonagall, Dumbledore shared his reflections on the battle and the revelations it had brought. "Minerva," he began, his voice filled with reverence and humility. "I have witnessed many wonders in my lifetime, but the power and savagery that Professor Gandalf brought down upon our foes is beyond anything I have ever seen." McGonagall, ever the stoic presence, listened with pursed lips. "Do you believe we stand a chance then, Albus?" Dumbledore thought for a moment, then nodded. This night they had accomplished the impossible. But had Gandalf not been with them, it would have ended very differently. Gandalf had saved his life once again. The tension he had held in his heart since the attack on Harry's parents and the burden that had fallen on his shoulders had eased somewhat. He now had the support of an equal for the first time since he couldn't remember when. "I do, Minerva. Professor Gandalf has brought not only his formidable power, but also a renewed hope. Voldemort will be aware of him by now, I'm sure. He will fear that another equal has arisen, unaware that he is in fact wholly unmatched. Do you think he'll try to attack the school again? Professor Gandalf believes Voldemort will attempt to raise an army, one far greater than any we have seen. We must be prepared, for it would seem our enemy will stop at nothing to achieve his ends." "And what of Severus Snape?" asked McGonagall, disdain evident upon her face. "He has fled with Draco," replied Dumbledore sharply, a warning evident in his voice not to press further on the matter. Revealing Snape's true allegiance at this juncture could jeopardize his critical role as a spy. What would eventually become of him, he did not rightly know. Perhaps the unbreakable vow did not have a time limit upon it, and Snape would have years to fulfill this vow, or Gandalf would manage to break this curse, or perhaps he would die, and the world would remain unaware of his true bravery. The departure of Severus and young Draco is a truly unfortunate outcome. Their paths have taken a turn I confess I had not foreseen, and it is a loss that weighs heavily on my heart." McGonagall's gaze was sympathetic, understanding the complexity of the challenge Dumbledore faced. "He was always a snotty little bastard, that Draco," she added, unable to help herself. "Be that as it may, he was still a student at this school and under our care." The conversation then shifted as Dumbledore outlined the challenge that lay ahead of them. "We must turn our attention to the defense of Hogwarts, for an attack is undoubtedly coming, Minerva. There is no safer place than Hogwarts, and it will remain so." In the quiet aftermath of their meeting, as Professor McGonagall's footsteps echoed softly away, Dumbledore once again returned to deep contemplation, his thoughts more potent and sharper due to the elven ring upon his finger. Such was its effect. He no longer required the use of his pensive. Positioned by the window, his gaze lingered over the vast expanse of Hogwarts grounds. The landscape had completely changed in the short time since Gandalf had joined them. He had thought the destruction of the horcruxes was the key to dismantling Voldemort's immortality and rendering him vulnerable. The progress they had made was significant. Yet, according to Gandalf, to destroy the horcrux would only serve to strengthen Saruman's grasp over Voldemort and possession of his body. Instead, he had counseled that they must collect the horcrux and release the fragments of soul within them at the right moment, destabilizing Voldemort's body and allowing them a crucial opening to destroy it. It was true. Voldemort now likely had the Elder Wand and may have unlocked its full power if taken from Draco by force. But according to Gandalf, the wand bore only a fraction of the power held by his staff, from which it had originally come. How would he, Albus Dumbledore, fare against a Voldemort now armed with the Elder Wand and enhanced by the malevolent spirit of an evil wizard? Dumbledore turned away from the window. The battle for the soul of their world was indeed upon them. Back in the Gryffindor Tower, Harry, Ron, and Hermione had spent what was left of the night dissecting the evening's events. The sun had long risen, and the trio found themselves exhausted, having delved deep in analyzing and recounting every detail until the early morning light signaled the day had begun anew. Now overwhelmed by fatigue, they retreated to their beds, their minds and bodies in desperate need of rest. Harry was left in a state of wonder and apprehension, having borne witness to the formidable and unnerving might of Professor Gandalf. He fell asleep within moments of his head hitting the pillow. However, rest brought no peace, as Harry was thrust back into his recurring nightmare. In his dream, again he saw Professor Gandalf, not as the ally he had known, but as a figure of darkness, wielding immense power, throwing the same small figure into the fiery abyss of a mountain, an act shadowed by the sinister gleam of a golden ring upon his finger. This night, however, the dream took an unexpected and far more terrifying turn. Gandalf, now cloaked in black robes, stood before legions of goblin-like creatures, commanding the fall of cities and the cold-blooded execution of prisoners. He directed Dementor-like entities, shrouded in black cloaks, to execute a defiant trio, a man, a dwarf, and an elf who stood valiantly against him, the last of their defeated resistance. The vision then shifted dramatically to reveal Gandalf seated upon a malevolent throne within a colossal black tower, a structure dwarfing any mountain, as he surveyed the agony below with a menacing smile. Harry woke with a start, his body slick with sweat, fear coursing through him. Glancing towards Ron's bed, he found the useless Ginger deep asleep, blissfully unaware of the turmoil that had seized his best friend. The clarity and ominous nature of his dream seemed too real to dismiss as mere figments of imagination. It resonated and repeated with a vividness that suggested a message or warning, perhaps. The enigmatic figure of their new professor, Gandalf, loomed large in Harry's mind. Despite Gandalf's facade of wisdom and benevolence, his true nature remained shrouded in mystery. Could it be that beneath the surface of apparent goodwill lay a more sinister intent? The possibility Gandalf could be an enemy in disguise, patiently orchestrating a grand scheme of deception and power-grabbing, chilled Harry to the bone, even under the warm covers of his bed. After all, it wouldn't have been the first time something like this had happened. Mad-Eye Moody had turned out to be an enemy in plain sight. Harry needed to find out the truth about Professor Gandalf's past. The stakes were far too high. The possibility that he and Dumbledore were on the verge of walking into a meticulously laid trap was a risk too great to ignore. There was a pressing need to act urgently, to pierce through the veil of mystery that surrounded Gandalf. At that moment, an idea sparked within him, a potential avenue to seek the answers that eluded them. He recalled the dream-enhancing potion he had perfectly brewed earlier in the school year during Slughorn's class. Now lying forgotten amidst the clutter at the bottom of his trunk, the potion presented a potential solution. Just as one could interact with figures within a magical painting, this potion would allow Harry to navigate his dreams with lucid intent, to probe deeper into the visions that haunted him for clues and information. Thankfully, classes were canceled for the remainder of the week, giving Harry time to fill Ron and Hermione in on the plan. Tonight, he would take the potion before bed and see what he could uncover. Tastes like shit, spluttered Harry, scrunching his eyes as he forced down the shit-flavored potion. Its effect was almost immediate, giving him just enough time to lie down under the observant gaze of Ron and Hermione. As he drifted into the deepest slumber, the potion began working its magic, not only deepening his immersion into the dream, but also expanding his comprehension of the world within which he stepped. The moment his consciousness touched the dreamscape, it was as if a veil had been lifted from his mind, granting him an innate knowledge of names, places, and the intricate lore that comprised the fabric of this alternate reality. The dream now became a profound odyssey of enlightenment, engaging all 5 of his senses. To his nose came new foreign aromas and fascinating smells. His ears now heard with an incredible depth sounds and noises he'd never before experienced in his dreams. If my dreams were always this vivid, I'd never want to wake up, he thought, as he strolled around the gardens of Bag End, smelling the sweet aroma of freshly mown grass. Watching as 2 particularly foul-looking hobbits walked by him, the elderly female gifting him a dirty look as she deliberately bumped into him on the way past. "Dickhead!" shouted Harry, intuition telling him this grumpy hobbit was none other than Lobelia Sackville Baggins. Then suddenly, Harry found himself once more catapulted onto the slopes of Mount Doom. The thick stench of sulfur invaded his nostrils, almost making him retch. But he noticed this time something was different. His awareness of the environment and its inhabitants had been heightened 100-fold. Harry now recognized the significance of the one ring in the scenes unfolding around him. He understood its power to corrupt and its central role in the fate of Middle-earth. Gandalf, Frodo, the Lords of Middle-earth, and even the Dark Lord Sauron were no longer mere characters in his dreams. They were now entities with deep histories, desires, and destinies that Harry felt intimately acquainted with. This Sauron character really is a fucking scumbag, thought Harry as he watched Gandalf interact with Frodo at the precipice of Mount Doom, in that last contest of power against the Dark Lord with a deepening sense of dread. He understood Gandalf's reason in that final moment, the decision he had taken to take the ring from Frodo and put it on. It was the only way he would stand a chance of pushing back the great enemy. And so, bitterly, he took the ring, preventing Sauron from regaining that which was lost. But in that moment, he realized what he had feared. The ring ensnared him, corrupting him, compelling him to claim it for himself, causing his subsequent treachery against Frodo, whom Harry now knew as the true ring-bearer, charged with destroying the ring. The resulting battles, previously a blur of chaos and bloodshed, now also became crystal clear to Harry. He now recognized the elves, dwarves, men, and other races of Middle-earth uniting under Gandalf's banner in final confrontation against the Dark Lord. Unbeknownst to them, also unwittingly serving to elevate Gandalf Ringbearer to a position of unchecked power once the enemy had been defeated. And so swords clashed, arrows flew, and spells were cast. Once the battle was won, Harry witnessed Gandalf's ascension to power and his subsequent domination of Middle-earth. Yet, it was in the quiet aftermath of his conquests, years later, as Gandalf sat alone atop the dark throne of Mordor, that Harry sensed a shift within the wizard, like the falling of small stones that starts an avalanche in the mountains. The initial triumph that had driven Gandalf's actions began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of isolation and regret. His friends were all dead, and by his own hand, no less. Realization dawned on Harry, even within his dream state, that power obtained through treachery was hollow, bringing no true contentment. Harry watched as Gandalf's inner turmoil deepened, and the old wizard grappled with the consequences of his decision, and his yearning for redemption grew. Eventually, after hundreds of years of solitude had passed, the old wizard finally cracked, leaving Barad-dûr in a desperate quest to make amends, and he journeyed to distant lands in desperate attempt to find a way to undo some of the damage that had been done. And after 500 years of toil, he finally found a way. Through the power of the ring, he managed to create the Resurrection Stone, which would allow him to communicate with his dead friends. And so, Gandalf was able to bring back Frodo, in a form more solid than Ghost but less than a living body. Harry, fully immersed in the experience, felt the tension between Gandalf's profound remorse and Frodo's initial resentment. The process of forgiveness was neither swift nor painless. After some thoroughly un-Hobbit-like language, Frodo eventually forgave Gandalf, lightening the burden of guilt that had weighed down his old friend for almost a millennia. Next came the summons of Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas, and their subsequent forgiveness of Gandalf, further enabling yet more redemption and reconciliation. But not before the dwarf Gimli had fulfilled his promise of putting an incurable dent in the wizard's hat with a spectral axe, which still had bite in its blade. Through Gandalf's journey from a corrupted, power-driven tyrant to a penitent steward of Middle-earth, Harry realized there was more to the old wizard than met the eye. As the dream continued, Gandalf embarked on a solitary journey that spanned 50,000 years, a silent observer to the rise and fall of empires and civilizations. Isengard, once a fortress of industrial might under Saruman's rule, transformed over millennia into the legendary kingdom of Atlantis. This new realm, a pinnacle of magic and technology, flourished under Gandalf's watchful eye until it too succumbed to the fate of all empires, sinking beneath the waves in a cataclysm of its own making. As centuries turned to millennia, Gandalf watched the dawn of human civilization across the globe. Ancient India's spiritual wisdom, China's imperial majesty, Egypt's architectural marvels, and Rome's disciplined legions all rose to prominence, each contributing to the record of human achievement. Gandalf's presence, felt but unseen, influenced the course of history in subtle ways, steering humanity away from the brink of self-destruction time and again. Throughout this long vigil, Gandalf's isolation weighed heavily upon him. The memory of his friends, their forgiveness, and the fellowship they had once shared became a source of both solace and sorrow. Despite the passage of time and the forgiveness granted, the burden of his past actions remained a constant companion. As 50,000 years passed, Gandalf's perspective on power, responsibility, and redemption evolved. The world he had known, Middle-earth, became the stuff of myth and legend, its stories woven into the fabric of the new ages that preceded it. As the dream neared its culmination, just before the veil of sleep lifted from Harry, things took another unexpected turn, drawing him into a final, captivating scene. Gandalf, wearing the One Ring, stood invisible to all others within the shadowy confines of the Department of Mysteries and the Ministry of Magic, watching as the Death Eaters attacked Harry and his friends. Harry watched, entranced, as Gandalf moved through the dimly lit hallways and approached the cabinet containing the last remaining Time Turners. Amidst the chaos, Gandalf, whether through sheer luck or fate, managed to pick up a Time Turner just seconds before the entire cabinet was blasted by a stray Death Eater curse, destroying all Time Turners remaining housed within it. Just as Gandalf turned the Time Turner, the dream began to fade, the edges of Harry's vision blurring as the pull of waking reality grew stronger. Yet, the image of Gandalf, Time Turner in hand, and the One Ring upon his finger remained etched in Harry's mind. Harry awoke with a start, the morning light filtering through the curtains of the Gryffindor dormitory. "Wow, if that was a story, it would be the greatest story ever written," exclaimed Harry in awe at what he had just witnessed. "Harry, what happened?" asked Hermione, her voice full of concern. "Hermione, the fucking trees were walking."
Thanks for joining us on this adventure. If you enjoyed the journey and are eager for more wild fan fiction, don't forget to hit that like button, share with your fellow fans, and subscribe for more episodes. And if you're as enchanted by the idea of Middle-earth meeting Hogwarts as we are, make sure to check out our series exploring this magical crossover. Your support brings these worlds to life. Until next time, keep the fantasy alive.